All right, everybody, welcome to today's webinar. We are titling it The Next Gen CISO's Guide to Cyber ROI, 5 Keys to Aligning Cyber to CFO Priorities. And I'll just read a brief abstract and some bullet points as to what we want to cover today. And then I'm going to introduce my esteemed guest, Michael Ruiz. So every 3 years, about half of all CISO skills need updating because of new tools, methodologies, regulations, and business priorities. At the same time, the escalation of cyber to a strategic imperative has caused a shift in the perception of cyber in the boardroom. This increase in awareness and understanding from C-suite and board members has caused many CISOs to shift their reporting practices, and it's forced security leaders to partner with business leaders in ways they haven't necessarily had to in the past. So what we will hopefully be covering, and some of the takeaways will be how to understand CFO priorities for the modern CISO, learn what CFOs care about, and how to position cybersecurity investments in a way that resonates with business leaders. How to move beyond regulatory checkboxes. We all know this is something we've been saying we will do for years, but we're going to learn a little bit more about how regulations are evolving and how to extract additional value from compliance efforts, moving from compliance to risk management, which is a big part of what we do here at CyberSaint. And third, but not least, clearly quantify cyber risk. So we're going to learn practical and actionable approach to quantifying and illustrating cyber risk, showing how your budget impacts risk buy down, and strategies to influence decision making. So again, welcome everyone. I'm really excited to have Michael. I was talking to him just before we jumped on. He's got a wealth of experience in cyber and in cyber leadership positions. So it's a genuine pleasure to introduce Michael. And Michael, I'll toss it to you just to briefly introduce yourself.
Well, thanks, Patrick, for having me, and it's great to be here with the team. So my career started 25 years ago in the military intelligence field, focused on signals intelligence. I've always been passionate for software development, software engineering. Got to write some code in the Intel community in order to help to automate some of the intelligence work that I was doing. And from there, I came into the contracting world and got to work at some of the best companies on the globe, continuing to drive product development around cybersecurity products, services, and capabilities. I was at Deloitte as CTO for Net-Enabled Operations. I was at Booz Allen as Vice President of Analytics and Cybersecurity. Most recently, I was at Honeywell, where I was the global lead for all of Honeywell's cyber products. And today, I've decided to do something a little bit more interesting with my career, focus back on my military intelligence roots and working at the Aviation ISAC, leading their global threat intelligence capability, working with the global aviation community to protect critical infrastructure in that space, and bringing back the 25 plus years of experience in cyber to help that community be able to defend our airways and our aviation platforms into the future. So I'm really excited to be here with you today and talk about this incredible topic of the CISO of tomorrow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And really, really enjoy listening to you talk about your background. That's very valuable work. And it dovetails nicely with the discussion today. So Michael, to start off, can you give us a brief overview of how cyber risk management and GRC have evolved over the past 5 years or so?
Yeah, I mean, I think I might even go back a little bit further and say, look, if you think about the way that governance, risk, and compliance came about, it was, small g, small r, large C, right? It was a compliance exercise. It was check boxes and information assurance capabilities types of things. Am I patched? Do I have that golden image? Am I doing all the things that make my system, safe today? But the challenge was that the second you put that on the network and it came in contact with the wild, those systems were out of compliance very quickly, and the job largely became this effort of whack-a-mole. How do I continue to stay ahead of the next Patch Tuesday, the next series of vulnerabilities that are coming out? And I think that over the course of the last couple of years, we've seen a move from kind of this passive defense to a more active defense. How do I start to think about the problem differently? I think we all know that this idea that we're ever going to have a system that's 100% compliant is a fallacy. And we really need to think about it in a slightly different way. How do I keep track of my systems as they are today, and start to think about where do I spend $1 in order to get $10 of safety or $10 of security out of it. And so it's a very different paradigm today. I think it's at the intersection of business and technology, really focused on information security, but really more about risk management in general. In the context of information security. But I think that's the biggest change I've seen, is moving away from information security and moving more towards risk management.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. We early days in the product, we started out sort of as a checklist engine, to automate a little bit of, are we compliant here? Are we compliant there? But then very quickly, we transitioned over into risk management. And we tend to view, compliance checks and, configuration checks and telemetry as information that can go into a risk management system. So it's been a big transition, I think, for the industry as well, and justifying it in terms of dollars and cents, bringing the business in a little bit and rationalizing cyber in terms that are a little bit more financial can help get away from that, flat surface of whack-a-mole. Every mole that comes up is equal, and you begin to understand where to devote your efforts a little more rationally.
Well, look, I think the thing that I see in the product, and kudos to you and the team for all the amazing work that you've done with financial modeling behind this process, to really look at looking at GRC from a fundamentally different perspective, right? This idea of quantified risk management is just amazingly important. I think that when I look at it, and the ability to see, side by side, how each one of these different components that we would implement are going to return on investment, reduce my risk, and change my profile. That's absolutely amazing to have that kind of capability in the space. So, yeah, I think you have successfully transitioned us from a regulatory checkbox approach to more thinking about compliance in a business context, and I mean that's incredibly important.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is important, and I think once the paradigm shift has occurred fully, once some of the, I wouldn't maybe call them laggards, but skeptics accept that a certain amount of business logic is not a bad thing in cyber, that we're just going to have more efficient outcomes. To me, my background's in economics, and to me, informational asymmetries produce inefficient outcomes. And this is really about finding the information, translating it across so it's not asymmetrical, and getting more efficient outcomes. So let's just shift a little bit to some of the regulatory landscape. Are there any specific regulatory changes on the horizon, Michael, that you're seeing that CISOs should be preparing to address differently with business stakeholders? And how can they maybe stay ahead of these changes?
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing question. Look, I think the challenge that we see in the regulatory space is just the speed of change that we're seeing. Cybersecurity has gone from a space where we had very few regulations and really almost no real business impact from a regulatory perspective, to it being kind of front and center. You have in the U.S. the SEC laws that now make certain level of breaches are reportable in SEC filings. You have laws now that are talking about how you report incident response and critical infrastructure. But I think the biggest challenge that we have is that all of these things are in flux, right? You have laws that are being put on the books, new rulemaking that's happening. And the processes behind this are coming in slowly but surely, and creating a very reactionary space. I was recently talking to a group of CISOs in the aviation space in Europe, and they made a point that I hadn't realized. I mean, if you work at large companies in a multinational, you might be in 2, 3, 4 countries at any given point in time, and having to synthesize the regulatory space for those countries is challenging. But if you're in a global business like aviation, our aviation members are in 26, 27, 28 countries in the EU. And now you have things like NIS2 that have come out where the EU said, hey, yep, we're going to have NIS2 and it's going to be this amazing, wonderful thing. And oh, by the way, it's a minimum standard. And then every single one of our member nations is going to create a standard that is going to meet or exceed that. And so now, we have members that are finding themselves having to try to figure out, how do I comply with 26, 27, 28 different regulatory constructs across, many different languages, right? Because I mean, that's probably 12, 15 different languages that those policies would be written in. And that's an amazingly complex space if you are a global company, and really you need a tool, you need a capability in order to be able to help to bridge that gap, because this is not something that's going to be done through manual effort. The problem is just exponentially complicated.
Right. Yeah, and you've hit on a real favorite topic of mine, which is basically harmonization, and how can global companies comply with sprawling regulation? They might be related. And NIS2 is a great example, because you've got the minimum standard, and then each nation is going to add on. In product, we have a lot of functionality around test once, use many. So basically what we do is we try to get companies to baseline on one sort of deep standard, like say 853. And then you can port that information across into additional standards. We try to be very flexible and help, because you're right, doing it manually, doing it in a spreadsheet, or even bringing in a consultancy, that can skyrocket the complexity and the cost.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
And the changing ecosystem is so vast, right? So if you do this in a manual way, if you bring in third-party consulting companies, that might get you through this year, but what's next year and the year after that, right? I mean, there has to be. Look, I think we need to think of compliance in this continuous compliance space. It can't be something that I audit once a year, or a snapshot that I take twice a year, or once every 2 years. It really requires us to continually understand how we are doing from a compliance perspective. What are the impacts from a regulation perspective? What are the impact from a governance perspective? But at the end of the day, I've got to break all that down into some business decisions, because there's not enough time, money, or resources available in order to comply with everything. And so now we got to make some cost benefit trade-off decisions, and that requires a system, not just a one and done.
Right. And I mean, I think you made a couple of just brilliant points there, because the one and done, what does that produce? It produces a state of play in which the next year you have to lift it all back up again, and it's just terribly inefficient. And, I think for us, one of the ways we view this is through control automation. How do you make compliance a continuous thing? You look at the sources that you can automate, and you start making living things out of your controls and your standards. In that case, you're not always lifting, and you're not always having to redo it the next year, or even 6 months or quarterly. You have continuous information, which can then inform risk management as well. So there's a real dual purpose to it. Let's talk a little bit about the changing role of the CISO. So looking at how regulations have shifted around reporting, and you referenced the SEC. How is the role, on your view, of the CISO changing with the increased strategic importance of cybersecurity in the boardroom?
Yeah. Well, look, I think the CISO is going through a transformation that the CIO went through maybe, 5, 10 years ago,
Yeah.
where the CIO went from being a technical leader to being a true business leader and all that comes with that. So I think that CISOs today, in order to be, successful tomorrow, need to speak the language of business. It's no longer enough to be able to show up and talk about NIST this, or regulation that, or technology this, because in the boardroom, in the C-suite, though that's lost. That's not the language that they speak. I had dinner with the CIO of Harley Davidson. This was probably 10 years ago now, and he was telling a story about how 3 other CIOs ahead of him had this task of consolidating all the data centers that Harley Davidson used. They had like 7 or 8 data centers across the globe. It was costing them a phenomenal amount of money. And all of his predecessor came through and came to a similar answer, which was something along the lines of, we need to get down to 3 global data centers in these 3 locations in order to reduce our cost by, X number of dollars.
Mhm.
And every single one of them went in, did their pitch to the C-suite, and every single one of them got knocked down and ended up having to leave the role, a few months later, because they just weren't doing what the CEO wanted, which was reduce cost, reduce cost.
Right.
So this gentleman walks in and he does the same analysis, comes up to the same answer. He does not want to be the 4th one on the chopping block for
Mhm.
coming up with the wrong answer. So he goes in and he says, I had to learn how to speak the language of business. So I walked in, and my first sentence out of the room to my CEO was, what if I can go ahead and reduce $150 worth of cost in every single Harley Davidson bike that we produce? And the CEO said, how do we do that?
Yeah.
And he said, okay, well, we got to create these 3 data centers because they cost us this much money, and it's overhead and da, da, da. And at the end of the day, the idea, like $158 of cost reduction on every single Harley Davidson, like that was a number that in
Yeah.
that CEO's mind just really really drove the day. And I think what we end up doing, today is CISOs will walk in to a boardroom thinking that they are still a technology leader or an information security leader, and they'll talk about this framework and this potential risk and this kind of vulnerability. And at the end of the day, you have to really walk in with a very different story, which is we are exposed
Yes.
to a $10 million a day risk. And if we do not take, a course of action to reduce our exposure, the likelihood that we will see that, and it will cost us $100 million over, the next 3 years
Right.
is X.
Yeah.
Now you're talking a very different language, right? Because now you've taken all of your technology, all of your understanding of the risk that you are seeing clear as day, and you're articulating it in a business context. Because I will promise you that the second that you talk about that risk to that CEO, he already has done the math, or that CFO has already done the math and said, you know what, that's going to be an EPS. That's a 50 cent a share EPS drop.
That's right.
Right. That is
Yeah.
right. They've already done that math because that is their language. That is the way they think about the world.
Yeah.
And if so, now I think that CISOs, when they walk into these roles, when they're presenting to the board, when they're presenting to the C-suite, they have to talk that language.
Yeah.
Now, they have to be subject matter experts in their space. They have to partner with the CFO in order to do the translation, to get the business analyst involved, to be able to model this out in order to get to, numbers and a rationality that is clear.
Yeah.
But it is crucial, absolutely crucial, that CISOs have to show up today as business leaders first and foremost, speaking the language of risk, speaking the language of business, and being able to foundationally have that based on their expertise as security experts.
Yeah, that's that's a brilliant answer. I mean, that's amazing to me because that anecdote. I was just talking to one of the, I had lunch with one of the largest retailers, head of risk at one of the largest retailers on the planet. And he said, one of the reasons he's successful in talking to the board and in talking to the C-suite is that his units of measure are T-shirts. His units of measure are, groceries. So he goes in and he says, we're exposed to this, and the cost would be this many t-shirts, or the cost would be, and they're in the millions, obviously, but he's not talking in dollars and cents necessarily. And right away, he's got their attention, because he's got the units of measure. And, I think in cyber and in information security, you've got a lot of really intelligent people, obviously, who for years have been deep in technology. The units of measure in there are slightly different. The units of measure in a SIM, the units of measure in XDR, EDR, the units of measure in CSPMs. It's all units of measure. But if you want to get somebody's attention, you have to tell them a story that they understand. You can't start with a once upon the time that includes NIST, or a once upon the time that includes, you talk about the amount of data you're moving through a SIM. Nobody wants to know at that level. So they might contextualize it. You can talk about some of the technology implementation if you can contextualize it. And I think that's what your anecdote really means to me, is you get their attention on, what it means to the business. And then you can talk about some of the things that you can do if you can make a story around ROI.
Yeah, look, I think it comes down to, at some level, you only have, look, more so in the C-suite and the board of directors, right? These are incredibly busy people that are dealing with huge, problem sets, and they operate, in 15-minute blocks, in order to get everything in a day. You have about 2 minutes to get their attention. If the first thing that you're talking is NIST 800, this, that, or the other thing, and they have no idea what that is, you've lost the battle in the first 2 minutes. And so I think to me the important part of that story is, whether it's dollars, earnings per share, t-shirt sizes, average bill size of a grocery bill, whatever the lingua franca is for that board of directors, for that C-suite, you've got to speak that. First and foremost, you've got to speak that language, because it's too hard for them to be able to take the information that you're bringing, synthesize it in real time, make a decision, and do it with any kind of credibility. You've got to make it easy for them. And I think that's, the one thing that I would encourage, all kind of aspiring CISOs or current CISOs is, do you really understand the language of your business? Are you able to speak to your CFO in a way that is going to be clear to them as to why they should invest in the initiatives that you have? And can you can you and the CFO in conjunction go to the C-suite? Can you go to the board of directors in order to give confidence that the work that's being done, the dollars are being spent in the best possible way? Because those dollars could be spent anywhere. It could be spent in more R&D. It could be spent in better marketing, or it can be spent in managing reputation from a cyber attack.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one of the key product innovations, I think, for us was actually going out and grabbing actuarial data on cyber loss events, and doing things to it, actuarial things to it, modeling it in ways that very quickly across 20 sectors, you can understand where you stand on likelihood and impact with regard to ransomware, with regard to insider threat, with regard to credential abuse, with regard to 20 primary vectors, and that begins to couch it in business terms. And those vectors can be dropped in and then associated with controls. And you're dealing with a calculation at that point that involves a residual. If your controls are really good, you're taking down your exposures over time. And some of the future stuff we're looking at is right squarely still in that same area, which is, based on what's going on in the neighborhood, right? And you work in threat intelligence, based on what's going on in our immediate neighborhood, what does that feasibly say about likelihood for us now and how that changes rapidly? So I think you covered, a lot in that last section. So, maybe just talk a little bit about some of the other communication pitfalls you might see CISOs fall into when they're engaging with CFOs and the broader executive team.
Yeah, look, I think one of the pieces that's really important here, and I think that your product does it better than most, is you start with benchmark data from these actuarial tables, which gives me the beginnings, and from there I have the ability to bring in more data from my own organization in order to customize the particularities of my, of the regions that I'm in, the type of business that I'm in. So while the benchmarks are great as a beginning point, the ability to continually feed in more information and be able to compare, what actual benefits I saw compared to, the benchmark, and continue to fine tune that is incredibly important and valuable. And it does two things. When you start the conversation at the C-suite, the first thing it does, it gives you instant credibility because you're bringing real data. That's third-party data that you're benchmarking against. You're not just saying, "Hey, write me a blank check, and let me prove to you like how good this is going to be." You're already saying, other companies have done this. This is what the benefit they've got, and they're in our industry, in our regions, doing what we do. And so we have to be at least this good. Table stakes is to be at least this good. Now, you come back next year and say, hey, not only did we accomplish that, not only did we hit table stakes, now we know that we need to use cybersecurity as a differentiator. We need to be better than everybody else. We have to be, less breaches, more reputational protection, right? And so now I can go ahead and create programs that allow me to, exceed those benchmarks, and continuing to have that dialogue around return on investment associated with how you're leveraging that data. I think that one of the pitfalls that I run into, and I see CISOs do this, more times than not, is this conversation, like it almost seems like they're saying, but can't you see it? It's like, it's so obvious. Like, I mean, it's so clear. Like we have, a level, a CVSS level 10 thing sitting in the middle of our network. Can't you see how important this is? And they said, and the first question they say is, what's a CVSS? Right. And is 10 bad? Is it on a 10? Is it a 100-point scale or is it a 10-point scale? They just don't know, right? And so I think that this idea of being able to come back and have a real dialogue, where it's not just, don't you see it? Trust me. Like it's my experience. Like I feel like we're trying, a lot of CISOs at first will try to barter kind of on their reputation.
Right.
And look, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, at the end of the day, everything is a judgment call, and having an incredibly experienced, highly, credentialed CISO is crucial. But being able to have the foundational components of being able to bring the data, showing the work as to why your experience is showing that is crucial. And I think that today, for a lot of organizations, state of the art is an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
It's scary, billion-dollar companies that are using Excel spreadsheets in order to track the successes and failures of their cybersecurity programs.
And I mean, you've hit one of our, Jerry, our CEO, likes to bang on about spreadsheets and those being the lingua franca of, risk management and compliance and in cyber. And, we're such a technologically forward group in cyber, generally speaking. Like we understand, technologies, we understand data, and then we load it into a spreadsheet. I've seen spreadsheets that run for 5 minutes to do one threat analysis. Just, you can see the smoke coming out of them. There's 50,000 lines of VBA in the thing, right? So, I mean, that's the kind of madness that has prevailed at times in cyber. And, that's one of the reasons, I think, just existentially, why this company exists. My company is to, have a system of record, and actually do some of those sophisticated analyses and services and bring them back into the platform. You can run Monte Carlo simulations, you can run graph neural nets, you can do all sorts of magical things in services, and then you've got a system of record so that what everyone is doing. You've got version control and control frameworks and standards. You've got a community in there building it together, and then the reports The executive reporting is all connected to all the other activity as well. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time with a new spreadsheet and send it around and create some sort of combinatoric nightmare, which we've all done, in our careers. So that brings me to a nice additional topic here, which are metrics. I remember going to the conference on measurement in 2017 and meeting Adam Sedgwick and the team at NIST and talking, but metrics come up quite a bit. What sorts of metrics are a key for CISOs? What metrics or KPIs resonate most with CFOs when evaluating the impact of cybersecurity spending?
Yeah, look, I think this is an area of great struggle. I think that the biggest problem that I see CISOs running into is they don't fully understand their universe. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. I think there are very few CISOs that if you sit with them one-on-one, with no microphones and for non-attribution, and you ask them the question, how many assets do you have in your network, and how many of those assets are inside patch compliance? If they're being very honest, the answer is probably, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? If they're being very honest. Now, they probably will give you an answer, well, of the ones that we're tracking, we know that there are, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000 of them, and we know we're up to, 80, 90%, compliance, right? And so that's fine, right? But now the question is, how many rogue things are on your network that you don't know about that are a problem? And so that becomes an interesting challenge of what does the universe look like? Can I get to a place where I understand where all the devices that are on my network and where and kind of their exposure or their vulnerability? So, but then you have to kind of take that problem like one step further, which leads us to, for those 80 or 90% of that are compliant, that 10, 20% that's your risk exposure, how many sit in the core center of your network? Where if those were to be compromised, it would bring your entire network down. The answer is probably not zero. Right. There are some number of highly critical systems. Now, the challenge that I think that CISOs will run into is that in a lot of those cases, those will be legacy systems that in order for you to be able to truly patch them or to really put mitigations around them, you have to bring the system down. And you might have to bring it down for a few hours or a few days, and that's a loss of business, right? And the challenge of being able to say, if I don't make this fix, what am I going to lose? Well, calculating a future loss possibility, is always suspect and always comes into question. Well, like, how do you know it would be down for 3 days or 5 days or whatever the case may be, right? And then that conversation around, yeah, but I'm not willing to lose 3 hours worth of revenue today for a 5% possibility that something may happen 5 years from now that might cost me 10 times more.
Right.
And so that's the challenge I think that we run into as a community, is that we're trying to compare against a lot of unknowns. And we're having to make decision under uncertainty, and making decision under uncertainty is an incredibly complicated set of circumstances. It's really easy to make a decision when you have 60-70% of the data needed, and all of the possible outcomes are pretty well understood. But when you start talking about all of the uncertainty associated with the various probabilities of something happening someday, possibly, those are just much more difficult processes. And so what I would say, from a CISO perspective, when you're thinking about metrics and you're thinking about, how to quantify risk, being able to kind of have, experts in your space that are operations research experts that are, finally attuned at being able to make decision under uncertainty. You need those kinds of people on your team. You need to be able to speak that language, and you need to be able to model that, or you need to buy systems and tools that are helping you to have a shorthand to that answer. Because I think that what we have today, so the complexity of the organizations and the infrastructures that we're protecting,
Mhm.
and the complexity of the attacks that are coming our direction, and the sheer volume of work that has to be done in order to protect these systems, um, it's immense,
Yeah.
and it requires a system.
Yeah. Yeah. Fully agree there. And that, the area of uncertainty is, a fascinating one, intellectually, but a vexing one, in terms professionally terms, one of the big things we're working on right now, leveraging graph neural nets and machine learning, is a bigger model. A bigger model of assets, a bigger model of CVEs, a bigger model that takes in threat intelligence, and can begin to look at some of the unknown dimensions of things, so that you can model that a little bit. The unknown risk vector in system is 30% of all cyber loss events, thereabouts. Because the forensics are not going to be made public. So there's a lot of unknown. There's a lot of uncertainty, and you're right. I think to some extent, finding ways to either have a specialized approach to that, or a way to kind of talk about that uncertainty and couch it in risk management, and do it in ways that the business can understand, is very important. And it's certainly a part of what we're working on going forward. So the fourth key to success here, and I'm just reading from the notes. I don't know if I can remember all the other keys, but because this has been so interesting, is tying everything together with appropriate framing. How do you recommend that CISOs frame discussions around risk buy-down strategies to secure budget increases?
Yeah, so look, I think there's a couple things. One, I think if you're a CISO, your budget is coming. Well, if you're anybody, your budget's coming from the CFO. But if you're a CISO, you're probably more closely aligned to the CISO than most others, because what you're providing is a cost to the organization. It's probably not revenue generating in many cases, and so you're having to justify your expenditures at a higher level. There's a higher bar to cross in there. So one, I think you have to first, you have to become best friends with your CFO and the business analysts in that shop. I think in order to do that, you have to speak the language of business, the language of CFOs, and be able to speak to them in terms that they can make decisions. Ultimately, even if you have that all working exceptionally well, you still have to go and sell your ideas to the board and to the C-suite. And I think that it's really important that you have to be able to tell a story about what you're trying to do that really engages with the organization. I learned a lesson when I was chief digital officer at a healthcare organization at one point, and I was given the task of digitizing and modernizing a call center.
Mhm.
Now, I could not think of anything I wanted to do less in the world than to work or deal with a call center in any way, shape, or form. But we went through this entire process. We built this entire program. We launched it. And on the first week that we launched it, I wanted to understand the success stories of the work that we had done. And so the leader that was working for me, shows up, and he had three stories to tell. The first story, he said, well, we reduced our queue wait times by some number. I don't even remember what it was. And he was very impressed by that. And then he had a second story around how he increased call volumes by, this astronomical numbers, and that increased volumes, of appointments. And he was very impressed by that story as well. And I was like, okay, great. But the story that I ended up taking to the board of directors to prove out the success of this call center was that on the third day of the call center being live, a woman called in distress. She was going to commit suicide. We had picked up the phone call in under a minute, which was our SLA that we were committed to. And the operator got on the line with this person, started talking to her, and was able to write a note to the lady next to her. They got an ambulance and police out to her, and they were able to intervene and bring this woman into one of our facilities.
Yeah.
Now, our average wait time for that call center was over 15 minutes prior to us launching this project.
Right.
And if you're someone that's in distress in that level, 15 minutes of hopelessness would probably put you over the edge.
Right.
And so that's where a metric, loses its meaning. Right. We might have made an amazing stride to go from a 10, 15-minute call time to a 1-minute call time. But what we ended up doing was saving a life.
Right.
We didn't create an appointment. We helped someone to get access to healthcare that they absolutely needed. We didn't, make the wait time for the person, better. We really increased their experience of how to deal with our organization. Right. And when you can take all of those metrics and you can tell a meaningful story that shows how you are impacting the business, your clients, the work that you're doing in a more meaningful way, that's crazily important. And if you are a CISO at a power plant or a CISO at a refinery, the work that you're doing is incredibly important. And it's not just about the metrics of, how many things you saved or how many attacks you pushed back. There's usually a more meaningful story there that you can tell. And so I would encourage us all to think about storytelling, get behind the metrics, and really speak that language of business.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's a great story. And, it's sort of the ultimate metric in a sense, did it impact someone's life? And in business, it's the same. Does it help us allow products more efficiently? Does it help us do what our core mission is better? And dollars and cents are a part of that. But ultimately, at the end of dollars and cents are, people and lives. And that's a part of the story. And you're right. Telling stories is immensely important. It's a big part of what we do. And it's so much easier to get buy-in from executives and from the people who work maybe under you as well, if you can tell stories, and it's a big part of what we do with the software. I see it as, we're translating one kind of data into another kind of data, into another kind of data. And that's a big part of storytelling too. You have to be able to talk across different silos. You have to be able to talk to different business functions, different individuals, different backgrounds, different technical backgrounds. But, the way to do that is to get data moving across everything and find the common unifying themes.
That's right.
All right. So storytelling, I love ending there. I think I will end there. Michael, I can't tell you. I mean, this has been one of the best webinars I think ever. It was just for me, personally, because listening to you was an absolute pleasure. I think Manur and team here are going to want me to wrap up with a conclusion and a call to action. I'm not going to read the pro forma language on that. I think I just expressed how great I thought this webinar was. I'm just going to do one brief plug, though, that CyberSaint, we have been featured as a product and company in the Forrester Landscape for Cyber Risk Quantification. That excites me. I mean, when you set out to build a product, when the analysts are talking about you, that's never a bad thing. We have a summary of the report's key takeaways, a link to this video. Please check it out and feel free to contact us at cybersaint.io if you have any questions or want to learn more about how we help CISOs manage their cyber risk programs. Michael, again, such a pleasure. I look forward to doing this again on any number of the topics that bedevil us. Real pleasure. And thank you, audience, as well.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
You too, Michael. Take care.